Okay, thank you, Adam, for volunteering. Testing, testing. Are you able to hear the interpreter? Okay, hopefully we're able to be more accessible, and that should link into live captions, we hope. Okay, so next, I'll turn the floor over to the next person. Oh. Okay. Honestly, when this happened, yeah, I was really triggered. And I want to clarify that I identify as Black, but a lot of people don't realize that I'm biracial. My mother is white, my dad's Black, and that's important to emphasize and put out there. I think that's an important part of my narrative, how I frame things and what my view is. I also identify as a gay man. So keep in mind, this is nothing new. You know, this has been going on for a really long time. I remember, let's see, when was it that happened? I guess 2 months later, there was this Black trans man that was murdered. And there's no story about that. I just remember when that happened, feeling profoundly struck. Like, there's an ongoing fear there, an ongoing thought, and a pervasive need to look around and be careful, because no matter what, even when it comes to like race in terms of all the intersections, with everything that's going on, and you've still got people out there that are murdering trans people, murdering gay and lesbian people. And so that feels like just an extra burden and an additional trigger. And it didn't really hit me that hard until I was videoing with my dad, talking, and saw my dad's eyes. And I could hear it. You know, son, look, I love you. You take care of yourself. This is nothing new. I've been seeing it all before. And then after that call, I lost it. I did. I felt really raw. I mean, to the point my thoughts were going where I was thinking, what's my role in this? What about me? What do I have to do to keep this fight going? And all of that, on top of that, COVID. COVID is also a race issue. There's injustice clearly there. Look at everything that's come to pass up to this point, and that really being the last straw. It's worth acknowledging that we're constantly bombarded with and hearing stories all the time like this that make it easy to disconnect and feel disengaged and just see it all happening and just be stunned. It's not easy to process. I'm still processing it. Julian here. The last few weeks have been really an emotional roller coaster. I feel like I've gone through all 5 stages of grief, each in turn, and over again, constantly. And then I saw this video of George Floyd dying, pinned to the ground, and I couldn't bring myself to look at the end of the video. The whole thing's, 9 minutes? 9 minutes of that abuse, and I felt like it just was, I was put in that fear watching it in that moment because of the color of my skin. And I'm mixed biracial. My father's from Sierra Leone, West Africa, and my mother's from a German background. So I've grown up with this in-between experience and a sense that I have to pick a side. So growing up, it took me a while to get to an understanding of my identity and to really understand how that impacts others around me too. Impacts my siblings. When I see police around, it puts a sense of fear in play immediately. And how do you address that? It comes with the color of skin. And, these kinds of events have had a real impact on my spirit, on my spiritual and mental health and well-being, my strength. I'm just exhausted. It's like 400 years of unending struggle. And it's there embodied in a person's pain that we're seeing there, the pain that rends again and again. And we've never gotten a chance to recover from any of it. And now with this movement, every eye is on this. And so my only hope is that this continues on into the future. You know, like Kristen said, I'm still processing it. And some of this is just off the top of my head. So talking with others is really helping to give an uplifting feeling, a healing and community and coming together to support one another. That's right. Action, doing something instead of sitting and drowning in it, moving. I get it. Teddy here. I'm feeling the same way. Just the same as Kristen, I'm still processing it. I'm still feeling all kinds of at odds with it. I'm still, going through these stages of grief, just like you said. I keep thinking of it and thinking, when will it stop? When? That's the question. When will it stop? So it's tough. It's tough to see it over and over again. So many things happening to our Black, deaf community and our Black community. When I saw George knelt upon, I disconnect because it was too much to process in that time. I just felt weight of history repeating and over again. And I come from a deaf family. My dad's hearing, and he has always said to me, son, you are always going to be targeted. You are always going to be, and that has always stuck with me. I tried to blow that off, but really, I had to face a lot of racism growing up. I still do today. And it's still tough to process that. And my feelings about the protests and about the movement, and since the impact of COVID, it's really hard to want to be alone, be involved because of the need to physically distance. And, also people with disabilities are at a higher risk. And mostly who's at a higher risk are also Black. Think of that. Oh, yeah, that really makes me think. That makes me more concerned about our community. And I'm feeling pain, and I want to be involved in the movement. And I want to protest, and I want to do something, and I want to act. And I'm not sure how I can be involved safely. And I don't know how to do that safely. So I just imagine myself going to a protest, and then something happened, and I wouldn't be able to hear, and I'd be arrested or worse. And I'm deaf. I'm not able to communicate. And I'll be targeted. So that just leaves me thinking, I've got the community here. I've got to do something. And at the same time, I'm trying to be safe. And it's important. It's important. Yeah. It's been really tough for me. I'm still trying to process it. Thank you. Thank you. This is Isidore speaking. I saw Coco's hand raised. Oh, there, Coco here. Just a short message to say that I've been really amazed generally with the discussion here about racism. And, it's interesting to know that you see a lot of people talking about isms. And when we talk about racism, people act like it's something new. And no, this is an old word. But it was coined a long time ago. And people say, no. I mean, think about it like the isms. And they're all things people generally want to ignore. And racism, now with the protesters, with George Floyd and protests, and that now there's been a demand to get that message out there. But I'm thinking it's 2020 and we're finally doing this. This should have always been happening. And we're looking at this and look at this. Our moms and dads and uncles have fought this struggle. And growing up my whole life, I saw it. But they taught me going through all of this how to endure. And the kind of tolerance and endurance that I have had to get through my life has matured me. And then, going home. Anytime I get home, home is the safe place. Home is the place you can crash. You can fall to your knees and pray. But now, racism, the time has come. It's got to stop. It's got to. Yeah, it's just got to stop. That's all. Isidore here. So my next question is going to be a mix of a couple things. Some of you have interracial families. You've shared that with us. And you may have partners of different race or children with different race. If you feel comfortable talking about it with our audience, what kinds of conversations are you having right now after these protests? Anybody? Well, as I said, my mother's become increasingly concerned for my safety right now because of everything that's going on out there. And she's asked me to text her and let her know that when I get home safe. And just that conversation hit me, It's all about safety, and that's a big concern for me right now with my family. Let's see, my point was that my mom has had uneasy conversations with me about this. She's white, and just as an example, she shared an image of Floyd being knelt down side by side with Colin Kaepernick, and that image of him kneeling. And she didn't realize how triggering that was going to be for me. And she had to address a really uncomfortable conversation with my family. And, my dad are concerned about our safety, and we're not going out as much. We're fearful right now, staying home. And fearful and staying home. And I've dated a white partner, and this does make us look at our racial differences and understand our backgrounds differently. And some things that are kind of typical of that, when I'm explaining why I'm concerned about holding hands in public. If you see a random black man following a white woman, people look at that as something unsafe. So, if I'm with her, I've got to hold her hand. And we having to have that conversation about what that means has been a new realization. Like, when I do this, it's because of that. I think you've got to just have a whole heart to really understand where we're coming from with this. Crystal saying, okay, well, my conversations with my mom and my dad are two totally different things. Totally, totally different. Mom, I love her, but she will never understand what it is like to be black, period. I mean, with the best of intentions and the best of heart, will never understand, and just saying the same message, stay safe. She's worried, crazy word. But then, yes, I get it. But we got to do this. We got to do this anyway. It's not enough just to say yes and acknowledge what's going on. Come on, it's time to step up and do more. Go talk with your white friends. Go talk with your white family members. It's interesting processing all of this, but at the same time, I get it. My mom is worried. And she's texting in a panic. Are you okay? Are you okay? And, hey, why aren't you responding yet? Why aren't you responding yet? And I'm trying to be patient with her. But at the same time, my levels of patience are highly diminished. I don't have any patience. It's worn thin. And so I'm more comfortable with my dad. When we're in touch a lot. And my dad said, yeah, you okay? Need anything? Are we good? And we'll Zoom, we'll FaceTime, we'll say, let's figure this out. And I'm deaf, and I can hear some. My family doesn't really sign, so that's something to try to video with my family is exhausting. So it's just exhausting, and it's emotional. And then I try to video with my dad and my family and trying to speak and lip read through that conversation. It's a lot of labor, but through all of this, my dad has been really, really understanding. It's like, son, you're not just dealing with being black, not just dealing with being black, but on top of that, you got gay too to deal with. And so, I'm trying to check in with my family, and they're checking in with me and doing Zooms, and just doing one person at a time is a little better. And if I'm not in the mood, I just step back and don't do it. Don't push, okay? And they know when I'm ready. My family has a lot of interracial relationships all throughout. And like me, my family has cousins and others who are in relationships with white partners. And, we're all going through a tough time. We're all having these conversations. And people are having to talk to their kids about what racism is, and where white people want to dance around the conversation, it's not really comfortable with that. And so that's causing tension in relationships. And on top of COVID, being stuck at home, looking at each other, and that's another test on a relationship. Plus you got to work, plus you got to take care of kids at home. And then on top of everything else, you got all of this happening. And wow, it's emotional. And my dad, my family, and all of us, it's all guys in the family. And we're, checking in on each other, giving each other tips and suggestions, reminding each other to breathe, calm it down a little. And there's just a lot of discussion about what it really means to heal. How can we cross this divide? If someone who is white and loves you and is committed to being with you as a person of color or a black person, they can be there for you, but they can never get it 100%. How can you cross that divide? How do you cross that span so that people really understand, so that I truly see you and you see me? How do we see each other's true selves? Like, you have to see me as a black man. I know some people say, well, I don't see color, but that's bullshit, pardon my French. No, that's all right, Isidore say. Right, so, we talk a lot about that. And like Julian just mentioned, you got two sides to go to, and like, you don't want to say or do anything that's going to ostracize a side of people that you love and love you. But really, you got to be real about this too. And say, we're done. It's time for change. But that's a tough conversation. Still working through it though. This is George speaking. Thank you. Coco, Teddy, anything more to add to that? Coco speaking. First of all, oh yeah, I am from Dallas, Texas. Born and raised in Dallas, Texas. My family there in Dallas is good, but We've got a lot of different skin tones in my family, and beautiful family, ranging from dark to light, and beautiful in every range. Amazing family. And I look at my great grandparents, and I look at my dad and aunts and uncles, and I look at the ranges of tones in my family, and we're all the same blood and we're all the family. And I look at my family though, and I see how my dad's dad, for example, is the one person with blue eyes in the family. And I wonder where those blue eyes came from. And look at those cheeks. It could pass as a white man. And in fact, it's black. But I learned that my grandfather has black Irish. And I didn't know that. I didn't even know I had some Irish. And then I started thinking about that and learned more about my grandmother was full-blooded Indian Cherokee. And that was something to learn. And then my other grandmother I was asking about. And she asked my, other family member and said, the interpreter missed it. And then found out that some time back, her grandmother was put to work in Virginia as a slave. And then my great-grandmother was also from another place, the interpreter missed it. And her grandmother and grandfather were in Mississippi at an Indian reservation. And I thought, Mississippi and an Indian reservation, that's interesting, because people always ask me, like, what exactly is your background? But I'm more comfortable with the identity of Black. I don't want to go into every little bit that makes up my ethnicity. My family is interwoven of many different peoples and across the generations. And yeah, but now I'm in Texas. And I call myself from Texas, correction to the interpretation. Teddy here. Like Kriston said, we're having hard conversations. There's no dancing around it. It's time to have real conversations. So Teddy, you seem to be frozen, Teddy. Yeah, okay, you might wait just a second. Okay, we'll come back to you with another question then, when you get back. We've had these protests going on for a while, and some people on social media have started posting about deaf issues during Black Lives Matter protests, and they're centering deaf identities. How does that impact all of you, and what's the effect on you and the community? Julie, go ahead. Julie speaking. A lot of things are going around in the deaf community and looking at BLM and how they're looking at it and using and really distracting from it. They're looking at side effects of it, like, for example, medicine. And, medicine is tied to the BLM movement. We're trying to eliminate racism, but the side effects, there's a lot of them that come with it. Like, for example, the stories coming out of Gallaudet University and some of the apologies are over there. These are all side effects. They're not central. They're not minor, no, but they're taking serious attention away. And they're serving as a distraction to the BLM movement, in my opinion. It shouldn't be distracting our energy from focusing on the bigger picture, which is BLM. police brutality, Black lives lost. That's the big picture. It's just, I feel like people should be spending their energy better, you know? Kriston speaking. All of, sorry. Yeah, Kriston speaking. Okay. So all of these issues with being distracted to deaf-centered issues are having emotional impacts on a lot of people. Like, for example, it just feels triggering. If I look back on my college days at Gallaudet and RIT and all of that, every time something happens in the community, you know those deaf white leaders are going to be like, oh, come on, everybody, let's get together and let's support this cause. We're all deaf together. But then the moment a racial issue comes into the room, everybody's like, oh, no, not for me. I'll pass. They expect us to deal with their racism, and that's bullshit. And it still comes up in the ways that we connect as deaf people. And man, it's exhausting. I'm tired. We can't get there with this kind of a vision. We can't get to unity until we really look at these issues that are on the table of racism. And it's really, that's what's at the core. So now, understanding why some of the Black deaf community is just sitting back watching this play out. You know what I mean? Because what? Because what? Yeah, that's old. At the same time, though, it's, it just goes to show that people are missing the point of all of it. If we're here to lift up people, all marginalized and oppressed people, once we do that, it's a win-win for everybody. The rest will follow. Lift up those with the least and everybody gets more. I win by lifting others up. Humanity wins when we fight for equal rights. It's, it's a marathon. It's not about who's the most oppressed. It's that looking at civil rights as an issue for humanity. When any win, we all win. We all benefit from it. It's not ever about benefiting just a specific group of people. I think a lot of people forget that, and they don't understand that that's one of the core points here. So they don't see all these conversations here that are just centering deaf issues. My biggest fear is that momentum will slow down, that people will forget. That's my biggest fear. And then we'll end up back to square one. Isidore saying, Coco, you have the floor. Coco here. I fully agree with you, Kriston. I'm thinking about the way people want to back out of that conversation. And we end up exhausted spending our energy in it all this time. There's a lot of important history to look at. Look at the fight. I have fought and spoken up for racism, and a lot of people have stepped up for the fight. And then, it falls apart, right? It doesn't fall apart, but now we finally get to the point where we're like, oh, okay, finally. And now, it's people outside of our skin start to see what this is, and it's trickling beyond that, and we're starting to get more collaboration, more unification, more building of bridges. And now, what I'm seeing and what I'm reading and seeing in the world is amazing. The world, but not just this country, the world is changing. I think more people are starting to see what's happening and know that, Black people are intelligent and beautiful. We've been doing this for years and years and years. Look at the pyramid. Look at the pyramids. Who built the pyramids? Black people did that. Black people have invented and created and been oppressed and marginalized. And it's time. It is time that we show our skills. It's time that we show that we have the capacity, the intellect. We have the capacity and intellect. We have that, but we've been grieving, and we've been grieving forever. And I don't know, for a year, 2 years, I was experiencing this, and then, I had that little step back, but then had to step back into the work. Teddy here. It's really about how we look at the movement. What's the impact going to be for our Black community in terms of dismantling racism? I mean, yeah, being deaf impacts me, but I'm also Black. So there's no real separate way to be. That's all together. There's no way for me to separate that. And when I interact with hearing people, I've got some privilege because I speak, but at the same time, I know that the next day I'm deaf, and for people to want me to separate those parts of myself is just not fair. It's important to uplift and recognize, to address the issues of racism. Not as just one class of issues, but an issue for all humanity, for all isms. They all separate us, and that's ultimately unfair. Kriston speaking, and I just wanted to add to that. You can't put a pause on any identity that you have and just put a pause on being deaf and go to being Black, and put a pause on being Black and go to deaf. It all happens at the same time. They're indistinguishable. You're living your life with all of those. All of those issues are at play your entire lives. Yeah. And one thing that I wanted to ask, and I don't know what your thoughts are on it, but I feel like no one's really talked about this yet with deaf issues of, say, sororities and fraternities going all around the community. What about our brothers and sisters who have been involved in those sororities? Has anybody taken the time to ask them how they feel? What are their thoughts about all that? Have we checked in with them? What do they want? They're the ones who went through it. They went through the sororities and fraternities and went through the hazing or the whatever. So I'm GDI. I never got involved in any fraternity or sorority. So I think that conversation also needs to shift and focus on the Black and POC people that were in those fraternities and sororities. We need to know what they were thinking and feeling. But also they need time to process it, because, man, I imagine this must be a lot of pressure on them. Their sorority brothers and sisters are looking around left and right to see what's going to pop. And so I see a lot more conversations to come about that. Isadora speaking. I agree. And that also relates to my next question, which is that we're noticing a lot of individuals starting to wake up, starting to take action, starting to donate. I wonder if you, as Black deaf men and as Black deaf blind men, really, this situation clearly is not going to change overnight. But what do you feel like they should do to join our protest, to dismantle racism, to create a safer space for all of us and our future children. Because right now we have Black, deaf workers that are, have disabilities and all of that. So what do we do? What do you expect them to do to create better change for a better world? Wait, Kriston asking, sorry, can I ask you, are you talking about like for business or what? No, I'm talking about schools, universities, business, all of it, organizations. Coco speaking. Well, I'm glad you asked that question. First of all, I'm deaf, I'm blind. And I think the community knows me as deaf and Black, but I wasn't always identifying as blind. And that's been part of my process, my own process of finally feeling that identity out as blind. And now I'm thinking, I just want to just ask people to please make sure and include deaf-blind communities, because I know some Black deaf people who, I'm not going to name their names, I'm not going to disclose anything or anybody, but it's too tiring, but go and support them. Our community, support them, and also welcome the Black, deaf, blind people in. It's such a small group. There's 8 of us that have outed ourselves and been public about our identities. But it's a process. There's 8 of us that have been through that process, but support us, bring us in, include us. And let's see, what else was I going to say? And second of all, people with disabilities, I always want to clarify, it's not like they're all the same. And some people have historically looked at disability as this really negative word. I want to change our notion of the world. That's a positive word. Like what, differently able. Now we got different abilities. We've got different ways to accessing the world. This whole idea of a disability, am I dissing myself? No. Disability means that we have experiences of encountering barriers. And, to change, we have to change the barriers. So we can't just say, oh, okay, I'm deafblind, and people will roll up in a wheelchair, I don't need that. I'm mobile, ambulatory, I don't need that. But being deafblind, people have approached me with megaphones and loud voices. You got to educate people on what our specific accommodations are. And being deaf, blind, and Black, there's a lot of education that needs to happen. We got to improve on how we educate, because right now our education system, it's bad. I think we got to try and make sure that our kids, your kids, my future nieces and nephews are better educated and have better educational opportunities for their futures. Okay, Teddy? Yeah, it's education. We need more. We need more support. Like, just with, joining and participating and having conversations about, money and finance and politics and all of it. There's so many of us, Black people, that don't vote. But really, voting is so important, because that's how we can exercise power. If we want to change things, we got to speak up, and that vote is how you act on it. Now, for our allies who are there to support us, and you're already in the system, you've got the capacity to do something. So let me ask you, that's an opportunity for you to do something, to push for true change. Use that power you have. Kriston here. I wanted to speak specifically about organizations and businesses, and support Black businesses. If you're going to dismantle racism, systemic racism, then yeah, you got to own up. Own up. You got to start having difficult conversations. You got to be real and honest about it. There is no way that anyone's going to regain my trust. I mean, as a black man, 100%. When I go into work or any organization, I'm not going to automatically trust anybody. No, always. In my mind, I'm going to wait and say, wait, they might be setting me up. I don't know. I got to wait and see. Are they going to have assumptions about, that I'm stupid and not as intelligent or not as experienced? And I've got the experience. These are everyday experiences. So it's not always obvious. But we're not dumb. We can read people and pick up on it. We can read between the lines and see what's happening. And yeah, that makes you resist and say, okay, all right, this is how it's going to be. Yeah, you got to own up and start having tough conversations. If you're an organization or a business that's serving Black communities, or we're part of your target audience, do the work. Understand and listen. Be there. See what the real needs are. Don't assume what needs are. Invite them to be at the table. For a real seat at the table. Not as a token, not for show, but to see and ask people, how can we support you? What can we do? Because you're going to have to swallow your pride if you want to be here to support it. I always feel like businesses and organizations are really made up of systems that support white supremacy, regardless. The country was founded on white supremacy. So yes, our nonprofits, our businesses, and so forth are all in systems, embedded in systems that are inherently part of white supremacy. These hierarchical approaches, I've never been a fan of them. I want everybody to be really working from a collective approach. And that means everybody has to be included first. Isidore asking, anybody else have something to add? Julian? Julian here. Going back to dismantling racism. Any organization or company, I think it's important. You got to start at the top. Having raw conversations there, paying attention to the decisions made there is important. That has an impact on the employees throughout the system. Where does the money go? Who gets it? How is it impacting the community? For example, are you supporting events and programs in your community? That says a lot. I expect all the companies and organizations should already be pushing for having sensitivity training, or diversity and inclusion training. That should already be in play. And if you haven't got it now, what are you waiting for? Start with those conversations. Start having those with your employees, and things will get better from there. Isidore speaking. Thank you. Teddy, did you want to say something? Teddy. Yes, I wanted to go back to what Julian was saying about businesses and how it starts at the top. Yeah. When you're pushing for political change, they've got access to legislatures, to funding, to government. So start thinking about where your money goes. If those businesses are lobbying and investing in political change, think about that. Think about how those policies are impacting people of color, Black people. Think about that. Isidore saying, thank you. Let's see, who wants to go? Coco speaking. Okay, about organizations. So set up a task force, before you set up your business or you're really working through what your business is going to be. Think about what your vision is, what your mission is all about, whether it's private or nonprofit, for profit, or, if you're getting state funding, whatever the case, you know, however you're getting the money, there's going to be regulations on that. And you got to be transparent. You got to have networks, all of that. But I think you start with something like a task force and then build up your network to make sure you're bringing the right people on board. And, right, welcome other people into the conversation. Don't marginalize and exclude. Elitism is one of the biggest problems we face, really. Cherry picking and favoritism. So that's one thing. The favoritism and elitism. We've got to welcome everyone to the table. So if you're setting up an organization, do that. Kriston speaking. I want to add to what Julian was talking about how it starts at the top. I also believe, though, that it starts at the bottom. Yeah? You got to create space. Right. It's got to be bidirectional. You've got to create the space for Black and POC employees to absolutely feel safe to have those hard conversations with the organization or business, and the business can learn from it and then implement those things. Then also you got to support your Black leadership. There's so much to gain from just supporting them. Thank you. Thank you. I see we're out, but we've got a couple more questions. One is a new issue that we're facing now. We've been talking about how police and politicians are starting to mislead on the topic of police and defending police. And so some people think that when we're talking about defunding the police, that we're talking about completely taking all policing away from the country. And so in your observations of the protests, how can we encourage people to focus on what the main problems are and what this really means? Anyone? Anyone want to take that one on? What would that look like? Or maybe a different framework might be just to focus on the point of what would a good community policing system look like to you in the future? Kriston speaking. Okay, I'll just keep it brief and say that the amount of money and budgets that they have in police departments are not important. My money is going to create a force that puts fear in myself every day. I mean, they have ridiculous kinds of aggressive sort of budgets by weapons and things like that, and they're criminalizing us. And all of that expenditure could instead be reinvested in our education system, be reinvested in our healthcare system, and all of the basic needs that we have to create a good, healthy community. And so that's my vision of what it should look like. Julian here. So I fully agree with Kriston what he said. When we're talking about defunding the police, we're talking about reallocating those funds, that budget somewhere else. And so additionally, you got to think about where that money goes. Also, you got to think about changing laws and policies for police reform. For example, banning chokeholds, banning any kind of a knee press or anything like that, and encourage de-escalation training for police so they learn how to calm a situation down instead of having to use force. And so that anytime there's use of force, there absolutely has to be a report, that there's no right of police to negate the need for a report. And then also, put your money in better places. It's not necessary to spend it on all of these crazy things that you give police. I mean, what's the point of that? Isidore speaking. Okay, Coco. Coco here. Really, money talks. I just think police and authorities and troops and armies and all of it, all the different kinds of policing are all working to support a system. I mean, it runs deep in history, If you look at the systems of policing, man, it has to be restructured. Yeah, it's unfortunate, but they just broadly are always misusing their powers and their. So you got to look at de-escalation. You got to look at their policies. It's complex. I just wish that here in America that we would change policing systems altogether. Teddy here. Teddy speaking. So about defund police, it's not about taking all the money away from them, taking away their pay. It's about reallocating that money to what's really important. Improving education, improving training, improving how they are able to interact with their people that they serve, how they're able to interact with people with disability. Look at the funding. That funding could support, people that don't get the pay they need, like for ambulances and EMS services. And those people are paid less while police get huge budgets. And they're ending up killing our people. What they need better training, and they need to reallocate those funds to more meaningful things. And now they're talking about what, being peacekeepers? Hey, that's not a bad idea. Then that funding could go to the community. So it focuses on the people. And cops are trained to react. They're not trained to really think through this stuff. They're just reacting. So they've got to get better training. Police have to have better training and know how to address people as humans. So yeah, invest that money in training. Isidore saying, okay, Kriston, I just want to add a little something more. Kriston speaking. So a whole other component that I don't think we have talked about enough right here is the privatization of prisons. Private prisons. You can't reform anything until we get rid of the incentive to earn profit off of our bodies. People are profiting off of our bodies. And that's how private prisons come to pass. I mean, then you got a wink and a nod judicial system that just incarcerates people left and right for greater profit. Oh yeah, you got to cut that pipeline loose. And then maybe we can actually talk about how we can restructure all the rest of this. But if people are still going to profit off of our black bodies, then I mean, honestly, where do you start? Coco? Well, you're right. Other careers require lots of training. So, if people got money in their sights, then you got to think about how the politics play into this. Like, I pay you, and then you just say idly by and let whatever happens. No, we allocate stuff. So if people's heart is in their work and in their career, then their desire to get training won't be based just on their money. For example, look at police. If police are going because they want to be better trained, they want to know more about it and be better police, it won't be just about the money. It'll be about, that's what they need to do to improve, to be better at what they do. And yeah, and that applies to every other job. Okay, we're going to have to hold and wrap up, but we're going to give an opportunity for questions from the audience. Okay? So we have one question from Nancy Leibach from CSD Riverside asking, what advice would you give to schools for the deaf who are now trying to unpack some of these issues? Kriston asking, schools for the deaf? I think they need to be hosting open dialogues with community members, especially POC, starting those dialogues and beginning to listen, hear them out, learn something with an open heart, and then put that into action. Teddy? So I'm going to flip that by asking another question. Are we going to teach Black history and Black culture and provide resources and support to different organizations to make sure they have education and resources they need for their students to be able to understand the history of Black people's suffering for so many years? I'm going to flip that. Like, for me growing up, I heard white history all the time. And I'm so thankful to my dad for always giving it to me and telling me about Black history. Oh, thank you for that gift. Thank you. That might be a good start. Investing in educational resources for our Black deaf youth. And that's really important. We got to bring that back, Black education. Okay, Coco? Right, as I learned more about my history and my culture, I learned more about myself. But we got to look again at school systems and how we can begin to restructure this. Like, let's look at how we talk about slaves. From my bad experience, they talked about people being slaves. But you know what? No. I don't think that the person saying that knows that slavery, that children are slaves in other countries, that slavery exists in other ways still in the world. And I just don't think that's funny. People talk about slavery in the school system and how we teach that. We've got to change that. Because from my perspective, that has an impact on racism. The way we talk about people being slaves instead of enslaved. So if, for example, they say, oh, people kept slaves. No, let's talk about how systems still exist today. Slavery isn't just something that happened back then. Teddy? One thing I have a problem with, not a problem with, but it's just about schools for the deaf. And there's so much history behind the schools. And some of them are not disclosing their history, and owning up to the way they segregated. Nobody's talked about how education can come clean and recognize that history. And the fact that we always deserved our educations. Look at Gallaudet University. On campus, look at Black schools for the deaf. There used to be a lot of, during segregation, Black schools for the deaf. But we don't talk about that. It's just like Black history. It's a side note. We got to stop that. We got to recognize and honor that history that we fought for so many years. And I come from a deaf family. My grandmother, my aunt's uncle, got her high school diploma from a Black deaf school. So that history needs to be better. Better taught. Isadora saying, we've got a lot of questions, so we need to pace our answers. Okay, so we've got a lot of questions. Let me see what we've got. A lot of questions that relate to it. Okay, so the issue of, let's see, another question about, now the statistics one, no, I think we'll skip that question. There's another question that does apply to what we're talking about. Okay, so if we want to understand what it means to be an ally, there's a question there. How can we say what a true ally is? What does that mean to us? Kriston? That means do the work. It means do the work. It's not enough just to do some reading, not enough to make some posts. That's performative allyship. Actual allyship is investing the time, putting the time in to know and understand the experience of racism on a daily basis. And you got to take the time to reach out. You got to take the time to say, hey, I see you, I love you, and how can I be better? I've had too many experiences where people say, no, I'm not racist. I'm all about the support. But the moment their ego is threatened or challenged or something in the landscape shifts on them, man, they flip the script. They flip the story on you, and all of a sudden they try to make you feel like it's your fault. They say, well, you shouldn't have done this way. And no. So there's a fine line between this performance that doesn't really dig into the hard work. That's an internal experience where you've got to go and talk to other white people about what your role is in privilege and have those conversations. That's a day-to-day way of digging into this, looking at your own minds and your thinking. And let me tell you, this is what Black people do every day, and we're exhausted looking at the world this way and looking at, who holds the power. Look at where the center of attention is. Who has that? When you start really looking at that, then you start seeing the dynamics. You start seeing how the story unfolds and how everybody's impacted by these decisions and actions, and then who gets left behind? Who's minimized, who's ignored, who's gaslit, who's bypassed? Really start thinking about and looking at these things in your everyday interactions. Look at how you talk about racism and ask yourself these questions. It's an uncomfortable process. And don't expect Black people to explain everything to you or for them to be responsible to mollycoddle your feelings. Okay. So we need to give the interpreter just a 2-minute break because they need a drink of water. They're working alone. The interpreter is back. Okay. The interpreter is back with us. I know Coco is going to be joining us again in just a moment. But does anybody else have anything to add about allyship? We've only had one person answer so far, but other perspectives on what makes someone a better ally? Julian? Julian speaking. An ally is a label nobody should ever give themselves. POC can give you that. If they see that you're really in support all the way, not like a one-time thing, like you showed up in an event and you get the credit and you get to take a little selfie and show yourself with the Black Lives Matter sign. It takes more than that. You got to show it in your actions. Teddy's saying, yeah, I got to add to that, commitment. You got to show you really understand and recognize other people as human beings. Yeah. No black or white, just human beings with concerns and fears, anxiety, mental health needs. See what other people are going through. Be there. Be committed to be there through it. Like Julia was saying, it's not a one-time thing where you get to say, hey, look, I showed up. Oh, and I paid a little donation and all of that. No, it's about commitment that's ongoing. Isidore speaking. Okay, Coco, welcome back. Did you wanted to add to anything on the topic of allyship? Coco speaking. Well, from the time I started seeing that word around, the community's always had a lot of tension about it. I think it's better if you're thinking about allyship. The way I see it is it's an interactive thing. It's a thing that goes between people. It requires an empathy. It requires an understanding between people. It requires effort to communicate clearly. Instead of engaging with tension, it requires dismantling those barriers, engaging with each other authentically across community, creating friendships. It doesn't mean you have to be everyone's bosom buddy, but you got to be members of a community that share resources among each other, that helps each other. That's how we reach equality. And it's not a matter of just saying the right things. And I'm laughing not to minimize it, but because when I look at it in the world, I see it performed, but what we want to see is that it's something that happens across people, across communities that support each other. And that's where I see allyship. Isidore speaking. Okay, so the next question is a lot of script here on the text, but it comes from Josh Oginion, and it asks, what is your vision after the upcoming election? Related to the Black Lives Matter movement as it's happening now, as well as the COVID pandemic. Where do you see us moving forward after the election? Coco? Oh, I'll keep short. Okay, so yes, after the election, I think things will improve. Right now, this is having a huge impact. What's so important is that we get out and we vote. And the president, we need people at the highest office like the president to encourage and move forward the Black Lives Movement. Kriston speaking. Okay. So my vision is after the 2020 election, after the pandemic, I think it's hard to say, but I do have to say that it's obvious that there's a tidal shift here. that has to keep its momentum behind it. I'm afraid and nervous about the 2020 election for a lot of reasons, and I'm sure everybody can say the same. But I think it's fair to recognize that never before have we had such an opportunity to talk about issues in this way, to really pull the curtain and see behind it what's really happening, confront the truth of it. And then it takes persistence to see the work through, persistence at the individual level, the municipal level, all the way up, all the way up. That's how we do it. Yes, yes, we can do it, regardless of who wins the election. So, Teddy? Honestly, for me, it's kind of hard to see past 2020. You know, what I'm concerned about is our people understanding when we're voting and why we should be voting. I mean, period. We've already said it. They've said it before. The last election went bad because so many of us Black people didn't vote. But if you look at it, the people that are left in power make decisions, and they are having an impact on our daily lives. So yeah, voting has a kind of power. So you got to figure out, you know, what your yes or no is going to be, and make it count, and to work towards change. And then maybe we can see what comes after 2020. Right now, it's hard to say. It's hard to even envision what happens after that. But what I will say is go and vote. And look and see who is going to support our cause. Who do I believe is in the right? Thank you. Kriston speaking. I also think it's important to recognize what happens with voter suppression. You know, there are a lot of Black people in the community who have not voted, but it's fair to say that voter suppression has been a serious issue. Gerrymandering has made it really hard for Black people to go vote. And you know, they host polls, even though they know that Black people are at higher risk, and to go stand in lines to vote puts them at higher risk of exposure. And so there's no pre-planning here. You know, or correction of the interpretation. Is this pre-planned? Voter suppression is a very real thing. We as a community have to recognize and acknowledge it and see how we can support each other to get there, to do the voting. And that will be more powerful than the mere outcome of the vote. The way that we learn to support each other through that, through some people using their privilege to support others that don't have it. That's how we do it. We see what we can do to support another. That's how we make real change happen. Isidore speaking. Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left, and I want to answer a couple of the other questions that we have. There's one about language deprivation. I'm sorry, I don't think we're going to be able to talk about that issue right now. So I've also been asked about Gallaudet University and their fraternity apologies. And I'm not sure that's really a relevant topic right now. We have said that, you know, the question is, should their apologies be public or private? Kriston speaking, both. Isidore, oh, okay, so it should be both then. Oh, anybody disagree with that? Kriston saying, feel free to disagree with me. Yeah, oh, yeah. So a little clarification and background is that this week we've seen a lot of Gallaudet University Kappa Gamma. Is that right? Kappa Gamma fraternity? Is that how you sign it? Kappa Gamma? Okay. So a lot of Kappa Gammas have been posting, pictures have been posted of them doing salutes very similar to the Nazi salute. And many of them have been doing vlogs with public apologies. And then people in the audience have asked us whether we think those should not have been public and should have only been individual. What are your thoughts about that? Should they be public or private? Kriston, no, I've already spoken my piece. Isidore, okay. Anything else? Anybody else? Doesn't seem like anybody else wants to address that issue. Okay, so then I'll move forward to the next question. Someone has asked about language deprivation and information deprivation. So if you look at the percentage of Black deaf children who have language deprivation and information deprivation, what do we think we can do about that? Kriston speaking. I want to go back to the question about, education systems and institutions and systems and how they change. If we are going to work towards equitable education for all, so that everyone develops and succeeds, that's important. Teachers are going to have to look at their own privileges, their own biases, their own racism, and they're going to have to engage in difficult conversations and acknowledge that Black educators that are out there can be and should be lifted up. That will contribute to the success of everyone. It will contribute to helping us get to that finish line, get to that goal. Kids are sensitive. They know when they're not prioritized, and they know when they're backburnered. So you got to stop with that favoritism. Just because their best friend's son is in their class, no, that doesn't mean other kids in that classroom are less important than the one they're connected to. So if anything, you got to pay attention to those kids who don't have, everything, who have more barriers. Isidore saying, okay, thank you. We've got 2 minutes left. Coco, you want that? Coco saying, I think you're right, but social economies, when I have lived in higher socioeconomic areas, they have the resources in their education systems. So, and then after my parents' divorce, I moved into another area where they didn't have the same resources. It was pretty scant, and it depends on where you live, how much economic support your school gets. And I think that system has to change. If economic disparities are in place in different areas, we can't let schools have those same kind of disparities, and whether or not you get a good education depend entirely on where you live. Isidore speaking. Okay. Teddy, did you want to answer something about the last question? Teddy speaking. I just wanted to second what Kriston said. Yeah. Isidore saying, as NBDA president, I do want to say that there are issues in all of the schools for the deaf, for Black deaf school children. And when I talk to these teachers, I'm talking to you specifically. When you intentionally deprive those Black deaf children, we see you. We will not continue to ignore this. We know that many of these Black deaf children do not get the opportunity to have an appropriate IEP planning meeting for their coming year, because they're either stuck at home without internet, or the school is not willing to provide interpreters for the meeting, or they end up not having appropriate analysis of their abilities because of their skin color. And so, when you impugn their intelligence, behavior, and everything else, we're telling you, pay attention. Look at how you see our Black deaf children, whether or not you're giving them an equal opportunity. So now, to wrap up, I'm just going to ask and see if anybody has specific tips that you want to give to our Black deaf children who are at home right now during this crisis. What can their parents tell them moving forward about how they can stay safe and how they can fight for justice for one and for all? Anybody have some advice? Teddy? Be authentic. Be transparent. Tell them the truth. Show them the facts. Kids are smarter than we give them credit for. So just be honest. It's good to know, these are life lessons. At some point, they're going to have to learn it the hard way if you don't teach them the information the right way, where they can process it. Isidore saying, okay, any others? Julian? Julian speaking. You got to teach kids to not be afraid to express themselves, not to hold it in. The best way to learn is by sharing your feelings. And it's really important to tell other people how you're feeling, how you're thinking. Kriston speaking. Yeah, I just want to second what everybody said. Speak your truth. And don't be afraid to be vulnerable. Be authentic. Be vulnerable. Put yourself out there. That's how we grow. And it's our future. We need people who get it. We need people who know how to put themselves on the table and discuss real and complex things. It's the only way we're going to actually move forward. Cultural humility, where we actually empathizing and put ourselves in the shoes of another, is that's when we authentically engage and put ourselves out there. Isidore speaking. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up now. And I just want to thank everyone, every individual who's joined the panel tonight. I know it's a Friday, a day of self-care. Thank you for staying late. Thank you for everybody watching us. And thank you for supporting the event. Thank you to Convo, to CSD Communications. Thank you for DPAN. And thank you for Teddy getting this together. And last but not least, thank you to our interpreter, Adam Bartlett. I'm looking forward to meet you one day. Thank you so much for making this accessible to thousands of people through adding voice interpretation. Thank you. And Benro Ogunyope, thank you. Maya Fahad, the interpreter missed the name, and everyone else, thank you. Keep the fight up. Tomorrow is the revolution, so stay safe. We will never stop this work until justice is here for all of us, Black, deaf men, and Black people. Black lives matter. Until we value Black life, we have to keep on fighting this fight. And if you want to be an ally, come join us in dismantling the system together. Much love to everyone. Good night.